Some critics of President Biden fear that he won't just stop with the pardoning of his son, Hunter. Mainstream media has reported that Team Biden is considering preemptive pardons for people like Anthony Fauci and former Congresswoman Liz Cheney.
On the pardoning of Hunter, supporters of the president said that he just did what any man would do for his son. Independent journalist Matt Taibbi has some thoughts about that explanation. And here to elaborate is Matt Taibbi himself. Thanks for joining us, Matt.
Thanks for having me on.
So let's just sort of summarize what your argument is about this. You're not a big believer in the paternal care explanation for this pardon, evidently.
Well, I mean, I'm actually a big believer in the presidential pardon power generally. I think the intent of it, if you go back and look at the Federalist Papers, was to provide a check against institutional power. And look, voters know that they're giving presidents this authority when they vote them in, and it's one of the things that we expect, that there's going to be this kind of thing at the end of a presidency often, and we've seen that in my lifetime, certainly. But the Hunter Biden pardon is a little bit different because it's cutting off an investigation that may have led to some other very interesting places, which is why the next problem of the rumored preemptive pardons of a whole range of people, as you mentioned, that might be much more problematic.
Yeah, I like that you bring that point up. I've mentioned that a couple times. You know, while I'm extremely critical of the actions Biden has taken here, not so much with the pardoning Hunter for the gun charge, but for exactly as you said, closing the door to a future investigation of corruption or influence peddling, I still wouldn't want the power limited because, you know, I want people like Ross Ulbricht and a pardon for Julian Assange, a freeing Ross Ulbricht, political kind of people who've been mistreated, and if you subjected the pardon power to additional scrutiny or approval from, more, establishment members of elected office, there's no way that your Chelsea Mannings, your Edward Snowdens, they wouldn't even, right now it's already difficult. They wouldn't have a snowball's chance in hell of getting pardons if you had anybody else involved in the process. So while I don't like this, I wouldn't tweak the power for that reason. What is, you've written so much about Russiagate and, the national security states' interventions into media narratives around these things. What do you see as being lost if we're no longer going to be looking at any of the Hunter Biden stuff with Ukraine, et cetera?
Well, that's not a story that I know a ton about. I mean, we did some work on the whistleblowers that were behind in the IRS and who were commenting on the FBI investigation and where that was leading and not leading. My understanding is that there was a whole range of shell companies that would have been looked at going forward. Not just Rosemont Seneca, right, which is the famous one that people know about, but there are others that need to be looked at, I think, because there is significant suspicion of wide-scale influence peddling. So that's disappointing. But I think it will be even more dangerous if they cut off investigations into, say, the origins of Russiagate or things like the origin of COVID or the government's response to COVID. There's a whole rat's nest of stuff that I don't think the country can afford to see preempted by a wave of pardons. And by the way, I agree with you about the pardon power. If it wasn't just invested in a single person, if they had to create another committee, that's the whole problem, is that these institutions, they're impregnable. Once you get an institution involved, that's when you get somebody who stays in prison for life, and that's why you need it to be in the hands of a single person, theoretically. So I'm not in favor of cutting back the authority. It's just that in this case, it doesn't look great.
In relation to the preemptive pardons, Matt, it seems like basically a large part of your concern is the idea that if those pardons were indeed issued, it would choke off investigations that would be worthy investigations in your mind, if I have that correct. So that is true across a range of issues, across a range of the names who have been mentioned as potential preemptive pardonees, if that's the correct phrase.
Yeah, absolutely. Some of the names that they're talking about include Senator-elect Adam Schiff, He was prominently mentioned in the Politico piece that was floated out there not by, conservatives or critics of Joe Biden, but clearly they came from congressional Democrats, the sources in that story were. So they're floating the idea, it seems. And the three names that were mentioned were Anthony Fauci, Liz Cheney, and Adam Schiff. And that right there, you see represented three major avenues of investigation. One is Russiagate, the other is COVID, and the third is the J6 investigation, which Donald Trump has talked about being interested in. I know less about that one. The other two, though, I know there would be significant interest in going in a wide variety of directions, not just on the part of Congress, but also the incoming executive branch enforcement agencies. They are rearing to go and look at some of those issues. And if there are pardons of some of the key figures, that will be very difficult for them going forward.
The mainstream media and Democrats and allies of President Biden are defending this by describing what President Trump might do when he gets into office is, settling scores with enemies. Kash Patel, who's nominee to head the FBI, has in the past said things about, going after enemies in, not just political figures, but also in the media. I don't want to see that kind of thing happen. I don't want to see just score settling because you disagreed with President Trump or you criticized him. Certainly don't want to see the government going after the media. That's everything I'm against. At the same time, that I don't want to see. Bad, not legitimate. But, investigating political figures who did, or government figures who did wrong or who misled the American people or were corrupt or that kind of thing. Well, yes, we want that investigated by our government. What is your level of hope that we're going to see from like a Kash Patel, the kinds of investigations or reforms that probably you and I would want to see rather than the ones that establishment figures fear we're going to get?
Well, I understand that concern. And like you, I reflexively recoil when I hear anybody talking about going after the media because normally, I would say in 99.99% of cases, that's usually an illegitimate thing to be looking in the direction of. There are rare instances where journalists can technically be in violation of the law for reporting things, and President Barack Obama actually broke the seal on those kinds of investigations by launching 8 different Espionage Act cases that went after leakers in media cases. And one of those involved a media figure who was named as an unindicted co-conspirator. That was James Rosen at Fox, or Rosen, I'm sorry. And I do worry about that, however. One thing I will say, though, is that Russiagate is an extremely unusual case where there's a lot of the stuff that took place could not have happened without the media. And there may be some situations where there were media figures who weren't exactly acting in the traditional way that we would expect a journalist to act. In other words, just reporting on stories that were handed to them. Some of the things that Kash Patel was looking at, for instance, involved illegal leaks that were handed over to media figures that kept maybe an improper investigation alive going forward. Now, again, normally I think the journalist is innocent in that case. As long as they're just reporting on what happened, that's fine. But there may be some civil issues if they knowingly printed something they knew to be untrue. And he's said that, I haven't sorted out yet whether that's going to be civil or criminal. So I'm hopeful on that score. Also, we do still have the justice system to protect us against overreach if they are going to go in that direction. And I would hope that they're not going to go in that direction, because that would be a huge political loss for them if they did.
Matt Taibbi, thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Thanks a lot, Robbie. Neil, take care.